I've got to confess that I've tweaked slightly the title because I think in your programme it talks about toxic leadership. So if it's not something, if I'm not talking about what you wanted me to talk about, I apologise, but you're trapped now and you're going nowhere, so you've got to listen to me regardless. Some of you might be wondering what I do. Majority of the audience know, but for anyone that doesn't, I just describe myself as three things. For CGS, I'm a thermometer, a translator and a courier. I'm a thermometer because I check the temperature of the army to find out what's hot, what's cold, what's good and what's bad. I'm a translator because I translate general speak into normal human being speak. And I'm a courier because I deliver things to CGS and deliver things from CGS down to the soldier. And I sit in the 4-star Space and Army headquarters, the job is fantastic, it's amazing, and if the Army Sergeant Major role has made a difference for one person since it's been established, then we're doing the right thing, so long may it continue. Some of you might be thinking, what gives me the right to be sat here to talk about leadership and to discuss leadership issues with you? Well, I think, I've been a soldier, I still am a soldier, and I've led soldiers on operations and in barracks and on training and everything else that we do for 28 years of my 30-year service. The other two, I was the soldier. And I've done that in every single rank and every single appointment, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I've had a fantastic time. And I'm also now in the unique position as the Army Sergeant Major, where I get to see the whole of the Army. I had a really blinkered view of the Army before, because I was in the infantry for the best part of 25 years before I saw the rest of it. So now the position I'm in, what I've seen and learnt over the last 2.5 years has been fascinating. The breadth, the depth, and the talent that we've got in the British Army is absolutely amazing. The infantry, the problem with them is that they think that nothing else exists in the Army apart from the infantry, but now I've learnt there's other people in the Army, so it's been good. For the next 20 minutes, I thought what I'd do is talk to you about what I actually studied. And the question, the dissertation that I did for my studies was actually, can Army leadership prevent the growth of toxic leaders or toxic leadership within the British Army? And it was a really fascinating question. I was in the prime position as the Army Sergeant Major to do my studies. It was around the time over the last 2 years of the Leadership Code coming out, lots of stuff being done about leadership. I had access all areas to ministers, to the Executive Committee of the Army Board, to anybody I wanted, and it really facilitated my studies. So the question was absolutely brilliant, and what I'm going to try and do is talk to you over the next 20 minutes, not about toxic leadership, but about the findings that I got from doing that Masters and based around that question, and the findings that I got from the cast of interviewees, the people that I spoke to. And I'm just mixing up with a few of my personal thoughts, having been a soldier for so long. And I'm going to try and split it down into 4 areas. First, I'm just going to touch on toxic leadership, just to set sort of a context. Then the next area I'm going to talk about is British Army leadership over the last 80 years, pre-2015. I'm then going to talk about 2015 to now, i.e. what we've done in the last couple of years. And then I'm just going to sort of wrap up and finish off with some of my own views and some other findings from the Masters about how we can better ourselves even further as we go ahead. So toxic leadership, I'm not going to go into detail. Many people in here may know a lot more about toxic leadership than I, and some of you might have studied it, and some of you will have your own views, and it's one of those subjects that we could discuss for absolutely hours. But what I do know is I find it really interesting. It was the driving force behind doing my studies because I was fascinated by it. And I've actually learnt a huge amount from the American Army, and because they've tackled the issue of toxic leadership a good 10, 15 years ago, and they've actually done something about it, and they do something towards preventing toxic leadership. Having looked into it so much personally, though, I now, after a couple of years of looking at it, find the term really unhelpful. I don't think toxic leadership is a good term. I think it's a fashionable term. I think a lot of people in the British Army use it and band it around as an excuse to cover up things that they don't want to do or people that they don't like. I think toxic leadership is a term for a much bigger issue, which is bad leadership. I think toxic leadership is within bad leadership. That's just my own personal view. And it was the driving force behind my study, and although most of my findings are about how to prevent it, there's other areas that I just want to focus on, and they're the points I brought up earlier. So Army leadership pre-2015, my literature review of my studies was based around literally that. What leadership have we done for the last 80 years, since the year 1947? And if you look at, if anyone that's been into the Sandhurst Library here, I think there's something like 1,061 publications within the library with the title Leadership within it. But if you actually take off the bookshelves the books with the title Leadership in that the Army has produced to teach leadership, you can count them on that many fingers. We just haven't done it in the last 80 years, which I found absolutely fascinating. I just couldn't believe it. And I've been to Sandhurst 3 times, so I know the publications that I've just put my fingers up for because I've read all of them. But I thought there might be a few more than that, but there wasn't. So I found that really interesting. So the first time the British Army published a book on leadership 80 years ago in 1947 was Serve to Lead. And for anyone that doesn't know, Serve to Lead is a little red book that every single officer cadet gets issued since 1947 as they come through this establishment. And every officer cadet will have it on their bookshelf. And there'll be hundreds and thousands of other Serve to Lead books in the thatched cottages as devices in the bookcases up on the shelves where all our retired officers have still kept it and they refer to it. And it's still issued today. The only other publications that have come since then are minimal. There is another one that's come through Sandhurst as well called the Queen's Commission, which is a guide to junior officers. And there's another one called Developing Leaders, which I'll touch on in a bit. All of them focus, quite rightly so, and for a reason. They all focus on officership. And at no stage in the last 80 years up to 2015 have we particularly focused on soldiership, if you like, or teaching formal leadership to soldiers. It's all been based around our officers, and for good reason. But as most of us know, the contents of these books, such as Serve to Lead and the Junior Officer's Guide to the Queen's Commission, are full of quotes and vignettes of very brave generals and officers that have conquered the world. Very few of them refer to signs or weakness and failure and losses and all that sort of stuff. They're really nice reads, and they're really good to refer to and dip back into and get some inspiration from when you're a young officer. And I've read them and I like them, but I'm not entirely sure that we've done enough publications over the last 80 years to teach leadership. So why didn't we ever write any more? Why didn't we bother writing and coming up with doctrine? Why did it take until 2015 to launch the Leadership Code and Leadership Doctrine and have this centre? And why did we never capture good leadership? Why did we never write it down? And why did we never formally teach it to everybody? And I think it's because, and these are the findings that I got, not just my own perceptions, but it's because we've always had an assumption or a presumption that we're just bloody good at leadership because we're British. And it genuinely is true. We are good at it, and we always have been very good at leadership, but we've known it, and we've never bothered to do anything more to make us better or to encapsulate it, capture it, and make ourselves better. 2014 saw something different. Developing Leaders, a book, was published by Sandhurst, for Sandhurst, written by officers, for officers. It was something new, it was modern, it was refreshing, it was glossy, it looked the part, it had modern pictures, it had some new vignettes and some new quotes in it, not just Slim and Montgomery and Hackett and all these other great names. It had some modern people in it. And it was a really good publication. Officer cadets got it. It was publicised, but not many people, there wasn't much of an uptake for it. Not many people outside in the wider army took up on Developing Leaders. And you can work out why that was, but I genuinely think it's because everybody in a position of leadership doesn't need Developing Leaders, so why would they ever want that book? And that's the sort of mindset I'm talking about, that we've always presumed that we're good at leadership. So the only people that would need the Developing Leaders book is surely the officer cadets, because they're thinking about being developed into leaders. So the uptake wasn't great, and that's the first most modern thing we've done within that 80 years for some time. I think there was very good reason that the focus has always been on officership, but I think we soon realised more recently we're missing a trick regarding our soldiers. And this isn't a pitch for soldiers. I was asked to give the soldiers' sort of view on leadership, and that's what I'm going to try and do. So please don't think I'm giving the officer corps a hard time in this. I'm not. I'm just trying to focus on the areas I think we might have missed in the soldier corps, if you like. I think we've definitely missed a trick regarding soldiers and non-commissioned officers in the leadership process, and I'll come on to that again in a second. But a general once quoted to me that officers have the brains to plan the road and soldiers have the brawn to build it. A simplistic quote, but I think it's a very good quote that makes a point. And long may our officers continue to be the educated and qualified ones to be able to plan the road for the soldiers to build and to continue what they do. But I think much has changed since Wellington's famous quote of "Our army is made up of the mere scum of the earth." And if you go into the Sandhurst Officers' Mess, there's a picture up on the wall of a load of officers and their horses, and it basically says that officers should treat their men like they do their horses in terms of grooming and feeding and all that sort of stuff. And it's a historical picture, and it's up there for a reason, but it says something about, you know, the relationship between officers and soldiers. And I think it's funny how we still refer to soldiers as other ranks as opposed to soldiers. And if you look at the Oxford Dictionary quote for other, it says it's a person or thing that is different. But we still refer to all of our soldiers as other ranks. If you ask them, they're not bothered. They're quite proud of their background and why they're called other ranks, but it's just interesting that we still refer to them as such. There is a cultural mindset in the British Army that I'm just generalising now. Soldiers don't read. They're not bright, they don't think, they don't need to think. This is generalising again, and that, you know, we lay the road that's been planned by the officers. And we know that that's very different. And going back to the road quote, if you think about it, those that know a lot more about the army than I do, and those that have worked in a lot of different areas, we have got soldiers now that are pretty much planning those roads as well. It's not just the officers that are planning it. We've got some very, very bright, talented individuals that are up to that mark as well. In my research of all the books that I read on leadership from within that 80-year period, I could only find one article written about leadership by a soldier, and it was by a warrant officer in the British Army Review Special Leadership Report. And actually it was a bit of a scathing report on the relationship between soldiers and officers. And it referred to being on operations, and it was the warrant officer's view. It was very frank, it was very honest, but it was the only one I could find that was written by a soldier about leadership, which I found really disappointing. I thought I was going to find a few more than that, but it was all written by officers for officers. But that's funny, I think, when you think about it, because who actually, when you think about it, leads our soldiers more than anybody else within our hierarchical structure? Who is the person that goes to breakfast with them? Who is the person that goes on parade with them? Who is the person that goes to the bar with them? Who is the person that is with them 24/7? It's the non-commissioned officer. And they're the person we have asked the least in order to capture the most about leadership. Yes, our officers lead. Yes, our officers are in charge. Yes, they are in the positions of the chain of command. But there's lots of other people within that chain of command that are in the face of those soldiers much more often, and we could have captured a lot more. We employ and trust our non-commissioned officers to lead soldiers into battle and in harm's way on operations from the age of 18 years old. We've got Lance Corporals leading people on operations at 18 years old. No other organisation in the world does that. And so to that end, why on earth would we never have listened, got views, captured the information and the experiences of even down to the lowest of our soldier cohort? I just think we've missed a massive trick over the last 80 years. So just to close this sort of section, I'm not being negative about anything. I'm trying to be positive now, because I'll come on to it in a second. I just wanted to highlight some of the areas before I finish this bit where people highlighted in my findings and my cast of interviewees some of the reasons behind what I've just talked about. And one of the key things they talked about that they think is one of the key reasons as to that behaviour over the last 80 years is our hierarchical structure. So the British Army has got a hierarchical structure. It's one that works for us. It's worked for the best part of 300 and odd years. But it could play into the reason why we've not valued our soldiers as much as we could have done in terms of leadership over the last 80 years. Also, and this came from a lot of the civil servants that I spoke to in my interviewing process, they are flabbergasted by the subconscious British class system that is in play in the British Army. And I hadn't really thought about it, but if you do think about it, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it's the way we do our business, but there is no such thing as a class system. I don't think anyone's ever written it down. But there is a class system within the army. We are very stereotyped, and there's a reason why we all wear clothes that we're wearing. There's a reason why our kids go to boarding school at a certain age. There's a reason why we get married at a certain age. There's a reason why we go to ICSC at a certain age. The working class, the upper class, there is that class system in there. And the civil servants were just amazed by the way and how sort of powerful it is within our system, the way we do our business. And a lot of views that I gleaned off people in the interviewing process was that there was a lack of trust and empowerment within the organisation, which I disagree with, and I'll come on to that in a little bit. So that's up to 2015, when the Army Leadership Code was launched. I'll just now go into Army leadership post-2015 and just cover a few areas on my personal views and also the views of others. So what have we done about the lack of leadership focus, if you like, over the last 80 years? Well, many in this room know what we've done. We have realised now that we have been presuming we're good for far too long at leadership, and it's now time for some new quotes and vignettes, and we realised we had to do something about it, hence why CGS launched the Army Leadership Code after 10 years of values-based leadership work in the British Army. We still know that we are good, but the important thing now is that we know and we realise that we've got to get better at leadership, and I think the most important thing is that our soldiers also now realise we've got to get better at leadership, not just our officers. Leadership is now on the map for all ranks, and more importantly, the soldiers know the difference, which is great. We have realised that we can actually teach formal leadership training, not only to officers but to everybody, and we know that we can make people better leaders. We love our Field Marshal Slim quote of, leadership is simple, it's just plain old you. But just to remind you, around the same time, I think, and someone might quote me wrong, Field Marshal Montgomery also noted that he believed that leadership could be taught. And it's arguably taken us 80 years to finally realise that. We're now capturing experiences, learning from each other and writing stuff down. We are listening to our non-commissioned officers and we are valuing what they have to offer. We are searching for continuous improvement, and just like the All Blacks and other high-performance sporting teams, we can't just say we are good at leadership and just leave it at that. We've got to keep striving, better never stops, and we've got to keep going and continue to make ourselves better. We have got our values and standards. Other organisations, as Mr. Straw highlighted earlier, haven't got such a thing. We've got a leadership code. We've got leadership doctrine. We've now got a Centre of Army Leadership. Took us 80 years, but we've got one. And we are now talking about leadership every single day. Everywhere you go, it's part of the chitter-chatter and lesson plans and notice boards. It's just constant now, which is great. We're starting to live and breathe it and not just putting a poster on the wall and living by the sea drills and the values and standards. But it takes time. Cultures take a long time to change. A climate you can change pretty soon, but a culture takes years to change, and we've got to give ourselves time to allow that change to adapt. And unfortunately, cultures take a long time, and they also won't change until those in the leadership positions within it change as well. And a culture will never change if one person in that organisation doesn't change. So the last bit, because I keep getting someone sticking up a sign saying how long I've got, what can we do better? This isn't just mine. In the first couple of points, I'm going to touch on the toxic leadership. These are the findings from that Masters. I could go on about toxic leadership. Much of my findings were based around the mechanisms of it or how to prevent it, but I'd need hours to do so. But in a nutshell, I do genuinely believe that we behave the way we do because of the systems I talked about earlier. Hierarchical structure, our culture, our subconscious class system that we've got, I think shapes the way we do our business. Another reason that could fuel toxic leadership or bad leadership within our organisation is the way that we report. Our reporting system is very good, but we have a tendency to report to promote. We don't report in the British Army to develop. We have one development tool, which is the midterm appraisal, which most people in here would agree, not everyone does it the same and not everyone actually does it. So we don't develop people as much as we should. So our reporting system could also aid the way we encourage, in some respects, bad leadership. The reporting system could also encourage upward and not downward looking behaviours, and this can lead to some of our moral courage dilemmas. And many of you will have heard about 360 reporting. I did a lot of that in the studying. I don't necessarily agree that's the answer, but I do, and most of my findings from every single person I interviewed agreed that the British Army should really consider bringing in upward feedback. It's something we've never ever done in our organisation. We do it informally, and a platoon sergeant will quite happily tell a company commander or a platoon commander or give them some formal advice on leadership, but no one ever formally gives upward feedback, and it may be something we want to look at in the future. But I do know that we're already on the way to making us better. We can still do more. We've talked about culture, and I genuinely believe there is much more we can do. We need to change the mindset, particularly in the combat arms, regarding encouraging our soldiers to think, to read, to write, and to contribute towards leadership in particular. Focus groups, debates and forums are things we need to do more. I never used to agree with them. I thought we had a chain of command in position for a reason, but now I've seen it, now I use them, now I do them, and I've got a huge amount from it. Soldiers want to be heard and they want to feel valued. They have a huge amount to offer, and we as an army could draw a huge amount from them if we just give them a voice. Just need to be careful about how much of a voice we give them. We also need to change the mindset that the Army Leadership Code is not just for officers, or is not for officers and senior NCOs and just the lower ranks. And if you speak to Des Desborough, he goes around a lot, many of our organisation believe that it's not for them, they're too senior, and the point I made earlier, we're already leaders, why do we need an Army Leadership Code? So we need to be aware of that. You can all put the 7 leadership behaviours under your signature block on your email, but if you're not living by them, then it's a pointless exercise. We must display moral courage, and as CGS always says, the standard that you walk past is the standard that you accept. And there is a lack of moral courage, I believe, in the army, and a fear of confrontation. Some of it is societal, some of it is because everybody wants to be everybody's friend, and I genuinely believe it starts in our officer corps. It's in soldiers too, but our officers are our leaders, and as long as officers continue to fail to display moral courage and the leadership qualities that they should be displaying, then funnily enough those that follow them will do exactly the same. It's a simple concept and one we continue to get wrong. Since being involved in the recent changes to Army leadership from the start, I genuinely believe that we have come on leaps and bounds in the last 2 years, and my research has proven it, although it's only an academic paper. There are still areas of concern, and it's still hard to measure success if success is something that we want to measure and record. I'm not sure that's the answer. But as we know, leadership is for everybody, and no one in command is any better a person than those that they lead. They are merely entrusted to lead them. And we can learn much from each other and must continue to do so, be it as an officer or a soldier. And that's me. Thank you very much.